Hi guys, it's Lynn here. Hope everyone is having an amazing day. Now today I'm going to be talking to you how you can care for Nepenthes pitcher plants. And these are these amazing carnivorous plants that form these wonderful little pitchers that collect insects. And I'm going to be talking to you in this video about a little bit about Nepenthes pitcher plants and how you can care for them and grow them. Now first of all, what are Nepenthes? Well, Nepenthes are vine-growing plants and they're about 200 different species. They're tropical plants that grow mostly in Indonesia, the Philippines, China, Borneo and Australia. And they're insect-eating plants with special traps, such as these here, that are actually modified leaves. And these contain a special fluid inside them, a little bit like stomach digestive juices, where little insects would land on here, on the lid, and they would fall in, and obviously they drown, and then the plant consumes the contents of the digested insect and takes it up into its plant body, and that's its way of getting fertilizer. Very, very wacky. And they're different obviously to commonly seen Venus flytraps that have the movable traps that collect the insects and just close the traps. These don't move at all, and they work by absorbing the nutrients from inside their little sort of equivalent to a stomach. Now Nepenthes plants can live up to 20 years or even longer if they're well cared for. And there is two different main types of Nepenthes. There's the highland species, such as these ones here, and the lowland species. And the highland species are the ones that's much more commonly seen for sale at the garden centres. And these ones here have a mixture of three different types of Nepenthes in this little bowl here. This one here is my Nepenthes sanguinea, and it is coming into flower, as you can see there. Pretty sure it's the male flowers, which I'm going to talk about in a bit. And there's the first little flower that has opened up. I don't know whether you can see it there. Quite amazing to see, just starting to open up. And then this one here is my, one at the back is Nepenthes Rebecca Soper, and which is this one here. And this one here is a bit of an unknown ID one, but they're all highland species, more commonly seen for sale. And the highland species are grown in their natural habitats above 3,000 feet. In mountainous areas with very high humidity and also lots of rainfall. And they get cooler nights and warmer days. And the lowland species, which are more harder to find for sale, they grow below 3,000 feet in forests and fields and with warm nights and warm days. So they don't have the cooler nights that the highland species would have. And that's a little bit about these amazing plants, and I'm going to talk to you about how to care for them. Now, the correct lighting. Now, Nepenthes like to have bright light, and ideally a part sun, part shady position is best, or a very, very bright indirect position. They certainly can take a little bit of light sun, and they seem to grow better in my experience if they can have a bit of direct sun. As you can see here, there's direct sun coming onto this now, but it doesn't get all day intense sunshine. So a bit of sun and a bit of part shade is ideal for them. They don't like to be grown in shade at all, and they will suffer and die if you grow them in a dark position indoors. And if you only have a dark position, or you don't have anywhere where you can get bright indirect light or a bit of sunshine, then I'd recommend installing grow lights. Grow them under some full spectrum grow lights, and you'll notice a big difference with their growth. So do not grow these in shade. They are very strong bright light plants, but again away from direct all day sunshine. A bit of part sun, part shade is ideal for them. Now, watering. Now, all carnivorous plants really do prefer to have rainwater, and Nepenthes is no exception. Rainwater is always best if it can be provided. If you can't, then distilled, purified water, or water that's collected from dehumidifiers that's completely pure, is great to water these plants. Nepenthes is one of the very, very few carnivorous plants that can take a little bit of tap water occasionally. And if you run out of rainwater and you've only got tap water, no harm will come to it for a short period of time. But long-term use of tap water can cause these plants to suffer in the long run, and very commonly seen the tips can go very brown and scorched if you use tap water, because there's chemicals in tap water as well as nutrients that these plants do not want. And other types of plants such as Venus flytraps and Sarracenias, they will actually die if you water them with tap water. But as I say, Nepenthes is a bit more resistant to tap water if that's all you've got. But ideally, rainwater, distilled water, deionized water or purified water from a dehumidifier that's been collected is the best for watering these plants. And obviously when it comes to the watering itself, well, these type of plants have to be kept moist in their soil at all times. If they dry out for long periods or even a short period of time, the plant will die back. So they have to be kept moist all the time. But unlike other types of carnivorous plants, such as Venus flytraps and Sarracenias, they don't like to be sitting in water. Venus flytraps like to have usually about an inch of rainwater in their sources at all times, but these plants need they need to drain out and to be kept moist. So don't leave your Nepenthes sitting in water or in sources of water like you may do with your other carnivorous plants. So obviously moist at all times, and ideally with rainwater. Now, humidity, as I mentioned, Nepenthes are high humidity plants, and ideally they love a humidity of about 70% or higher. And obviously this can be difficult if you're growing these plants in the house, because usually the air inside the home is much drier, usually around 50 or 60%, if not even lower, depending on where you live in the world, obviously. But if all you have, if you can give them 70% humidity, that's great. This one here we have in our kitchen, it's close to a window, and our kitchen is round, is about 70%, and we have all our other sort of tropical plants in here that do very well at that. But if you have growing Nepenthes, say indoors in a dry room, then I recommend that you spray the whole plant, ideally with rainwater, every day to keep the humidity up. And if the air is still too dry, then I'd also recommend possibly growing it either in a greenhouse where you can give more humidity, in a warm greenhouse now, not a cold greenhouse. I'm going to talk about the temperatures in a minute. And if not, grow in a terrarium. They also grow very well in terrariums because of the high humidity. And also if you've got a room where you've got a humidifier, not a dehumidifier, a humidifier, that will also add extra humidity to the room. And you want to make sure as well that you don't grow these plants near radiators. We have this radiator switched off because this is our kitchen where we grow a lot of our tropical plants, as you can see, and they like the humidity and a bit more of it's never cold in here anyway. It's always a warm temperature. As I say, it gets a lot of warmth coming in from the window. But don't grow these near radiators or other types of dry heat sources, because that will also dry out these plants too much. They like the humidity, and it also stops the pitchers from developing as well. You can see here the pitchers as you're starting to develop, and a lot of people say, why are the pitchers drying off? They grow so far, then they just dry back. It's nearly always down to two things. One is insect pests attacking the pitchers as they form, and then they dry up. And the other one, the most commonly one, is down to lack of air humidity, and it dries off. It doesn't hurt the plant, but obviously it stops it from developing the lovely pitchers that make these plants so amazing. Now, temperature. Now, as I said, there's two different main types of Nepenthes plants, the highland and the lowland. And as I said, the highland species are the most commonly ones that are available for sale. The lowland species tend to be more specialised. And if you do know the exact type of Nepenthes you have, that's always best because you can check. But in general here, the highland species like a minimum temperature of 50 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 10 Celsius, and a maximum temperature of 85 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And they can take a little bit lower than that, a little bit higher than that for brief periods, but that's the ideal temperature. Certainly when it comes to the winter times, I would not let these plants go any lower than 10°C, which is 50 degrees Fahrenheit, because the highland species as well as the lowland are very warm tropical carnivorous plants. So don't grow these in cold greenhouses or outdoors if you had a cold climate. Do make sure they're kept at a minimum of 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And I say the highland species like a cooler drop of nighttime temperature. For example, during the daytime, even in the winter, they're like an ideal temperature of around 15 to 20 C, which is about 60 to 65, 70 degrees Fahrenheit in the winter even, and then of a drop no lower than 10 C, 50 degrees Fahrenheit. They don't like to be kept at the same temperature all the time. Now, if you're growing these in houses, that probably is ideal because most people turn their heating off during the night time, and therefore the drop in temperatures these plants love. Now, with the lowland species, they like a constantly warm temperature and warm nights as well as warm days. And ideally, the minimum temperature for lowland species will be 70 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 20 C. So obviously it's constantly warm. Difficult, obviously, during the winter time, unless you have a very warm house or very warm greenhouse, and you have very warm nights as well. Most people wouldn't, even in warm climates, switch the heating off of a night, could drop a little bit low. But they like a warm nights as well. And ideal daytime temperatures will be between 70 degrees Fahrenheit and 95 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 20 Celsius to 35 Celsius, and no minimum less than 20 Celsius. So obviously, if you grow lowland species, they do like very warm nights, making it very difficult to grow indoors. As I say, that's why the highland species such as these are much more commonly easier, personally in my opinion now, easier to grow than lowland species would be. Now, when it comes to the soil and the potting mediums, you can use any good quality potting mix that's made especially for carnivorous plants. I use a special carnivorous plant soil that states is for carnivorous plants, including Venus flytraps and that. But you can also make up your own soil mix very easily, as long as it's very low, if not nutrient free. And what you can use is pure sphagnum moss with no added nutrients and perlite. Or you can use peat moss that's got no added nutrients and perlite. And you can use the soil mix, say like either the peat moss or the sphagnum moss with no added nutrients. So make sure if you buy it from a shop that it hasn't got any added nutrients to it. At 60% and then add 40% perlite. And this is a good mix for potting up Nepenthes. Some people use orchid bark as well, as long as it's not orchid soil that has added nutrients. Orchid bark works well. But personally, I find sphagnum moss, peat moss and perlite works really well for Nepenthes. And I say you mustn't use normal soil or normal houseplant soil for Nepenthes, because the nutrients in commercial houseplant soils will scorch the roots and definitely can cause damage to these plants. I say they get their nutrients from catching their insects there. So by using fertilizers as well, I'm going to talk about in a minute, by using houseplant soils with fertilizers in, it can be very detrimental. So make sure you only use carnivorous soil or make up your own. And with repotting, they can pretty much stay in the same pots for quite a long time. I'll probably repot my carnivorous plants probably once every 3 to 5 years, and usually when they outgrow the pot or when I just want to freshen up the soil. But usually you can keep them in pretty much as long as you want to, and then I just refresh every few years. Now, fertilising. Now, obviously, as such, you shouldn't have to fertilise these plants, because the whole point with carnivorous plants is that they do catch the insects in these little traps there. And as I mentioned before, this is like the stomach of the plant, where it consumes the dead insects it catches in its digestive juices. And this is what helps the plant grow. But obviously, when you're growing plants indoors and they never really have an opportunity to catch insects, well, if you can bring your plants in the spring and summer, when the temperatures are warm enough, out into a shaded spot but bright spot where it can catch natural insects during the summer, this is fine. There's no need to worry during the winter months about feeding it. The plant doesn't have a dormancy like other types of plants. This will carry on growing all through the winter, much slower at winter than other plants, but it doesn't have a dormancy. But there's no need to worry about feeding. If it's caught insects during the spring and summer months when it's been outdoors, it's got enough nutrients inside its system to keep it going until the following spring. But if you grow your plants indoors all the time, spring and summer, and it never really gets a chance to catch insects, then what you can do There's two things you can do. One is, you know, I'm sure everybody, it doesn't matter how clean your house is, occasionally sees dead flies that have recently died in the windowsill and things like that. If they're fresh flies that have recently died, you can just pop them into the traps. I even do that myself. It sounds horrible. I'm not one for using live insects or anything like that. But if I find a dead fly that's recently died, I just pop it into the trap, and it helps give it a bit of nourishment. You can do that. The same with other types of insects as well. I know some people that use live insects and mealworms and things like that, but I've got no experience of doing that myself, but I've heard people do that. But if you have recent insects that you've seen have recently died, you can pop them into the traps. Now, I know of other growers, I've never done this myself, but other growers who keep them indoors all year round, and they use a very, very, very dilute amount of plant feed. And when I say a dilute amount, they literally use about a pinhead size, tiny amount, and they will just mix that with a very small amount of water and actually put it into the traps. And they say that works well as well, and it gets its nutrients that way. But I've never done that myself, so I can't speak from experience, only what I know that other growers have done that. So I just want to mention that as well. That's another option. Now, as I said, there's not really any need, if you're doing that, to really fertilise any other way. As I say, fertilising these plants, especially if you fertilise them in the typical way with water into the soil, you can kill these plants. It's definitely not recommended. You don't do that at all. But I do know some other growers as well that will put, again, a very, very, very dilute fertiliser, very small amount, say like orchid feed, for example. Nepenthes grow very well with orchids because they like very similar growing conditions. And they will add a very tiny drop, usually about 1/4 of a teaspoon, into about 1 litre of water. And then they will spray the whole foliage with this feed, usually about once a month during the spring and summer only. And they have great success. Again, it's not something I've ever done, but that's another way of using it as a bit of a foliar feed. But if you're giving it insects, so it's out in the spring or summer, it's collecting insects naturally, there's no need to really do that. The natural way is always best, I think. That's what these plants were meant to do. Now, when it comes to pruning these plants, I'll just show you here. That's a dead, dried up picture there, and there's another one there. I normally leave them on, and then when the original part of the leaf sometimes dies back, I just cut it back just to keep it tidy looking. And also, when the plants get very, very long, they're vining plants, and you can have them growing up onto poles or anything like that for support. They make great hanging baskets when you just leave them to hang down as well. But if you really want to keep them more compact, you can prune them back. No problem, no hurt come to the plant. And also, it's a great way to take cuttings as well. And if you want to know how to prune dead leaves and dead traps of Nepenthes, I have made a video on how to prune Nepenthes. Links will be up above, and I'll put it down below in the video description as well. And if you want to know how to take cuttings of Nepenthes plants, then my wonderful friend Des, who has an amazing YouTube channel here called Scary Fear, has made a really brilliant video on how to take cuttings of Nepenthes plants, how to propagate them. So do check her video out. Links up above, and I'll also put Des's video down below as well. It's very detailed on how to take cuttings of Nepenthes. Now, propagation, as I've mentioned, you can take cuttings of these plants very easily, especially if you do want to prune it back to keep it more compact. You can then take cuttings. As I say, I've mentioned Desi's video, so check that out if you want to take cuttings and get more plants. And also, you can sow Nepenthes from seed. I've never done this. I've successfully grown Venus flytraps from seed with great success. I've never sown Nepenthes, but it's a similar method. And I know it can take a long time growing them from seed, and probably up to 3 or 4 years before you get any real size plants. But if you want to grow them from seed, there's lots of information online on how to do that. So do check the information on the internet if you want to know how to grow Nepenthes from seed. And by the way, if you want to know how to grow Venus flytraps from seed, check out a video I have made on how to grow Venus flytraps from seed. Links also up above and down below in the video description. Now, flowering, as you can see here, this is my Nepenthes sanguinea just coming into bloom. There's its little buds there, and the first of the little cute flowers has just opened there. And with Nepenthes, a lot of people say, how can I get my Nepenthes to flower? Well, they do have to be quite mature before they flower, usually quite a few years. This Nepenthes sanguinea I've had probably for about 5 years, and it was gifted to me as a cutting from my wonderful friend Chris Coyle, who lives here in Ireland, in Galway. And it's the first time flowering for me, so I'm very excited. So I'm looking forward to seeing the flowers. The flowers are usually nothing really special, but it's just exciting to get the plant that you know is coming into flower. And with the Nepenthes, there's both male and female plants and flowers. They're not like some plants that have both male and female on them. These are either male or female. And how to tell the difference between the two is the male has more little, when it's coming into flower, has more like little round balls, excuse the expression, round little balls as buds. I'm pretty sure that this one is a male. And the female one has more, the actual buds are more spaced out and wider. And they're more oval shaped, the buds. As I see here, these are more round and ball-like. And the female ones are more oval shaped. And that's how to tell the difference between the male and female flowers. And very excited to see this in flower very soon. Now when it comes to getting them to form pitchers, a lot of people always say, no, I've had a pitcher plant for years, and when I bought it, it was full of pitchers and it's never formed any since, but it just keeps growing. Well, it's down to two things. The most obvious one is lack of humidity. As I say, these are very common house plants, and people often grow them in windows and things like that, often over radiators and other sources of heat that I've just mentioned. If they're growing in low humidity, the plant won't necessarily die. These are quite hardy, especially the highland varieties, the more commonly seen for sale ones. And the plant will just, especially if it's very warm, will just carry on growing into this vine. But it won't form pitchers unless it's got the right humidity. So, as I say, humidity is a real issue if you want to have pitchers. You have to make sure you've got at least 70% humidity or more. And I would recommend, obviously, giving this some source of extra humidity, spraying the plant regularly with fresh rainwater or other type of distilled water. Spraying it with tap water, as long as it's not hard water, is not going to hurt as such if you only spray the plant with it. It will help to increase the humidity. And also growing them in a terrarium, if you can put a big glass tank and grow it in there and spray it, keep it watered and everything, that will also increase the humidity to encourage more pitchers. And also the second thing is as well, they do need, as I mentioned, bright light and ideally a bit of some direct sun to form pitchers. If you're growing them in a shadier spot, it's not getting enough light. It doesn't matter how much humidity it's getting, it also won't form pitchers. So them two things are important. And if you find it's forming pitchers and they keep drying back, then sometimes it can be down to pests, which I'm going to talk about now, especially thrips and the like. And also, as I mentioned, if they start to develop and don't grow properly, it's usually down to lack of air humidity and hidden pests. Now, last of all, pests and diseases. Now, the Nepenthes very rarely come down with any type of diseases. The most common one would be rot. You know, as I mentioned, although these are carnivorous plants, they're not to be treated the same way as Venus flytraps and Sarracenias and sundews and all the other ones, because they need to be kept in a source of water all the time. The Nepenthes like to drain out. They don't like to sit in soggy soil. They like damp, constantly damp soil. Never allow them to dry out, but then must never be sitting in water either, because the stems can rot back. And if that's the case, they're quite easy to take cuttings from and carry on the plant that way. So rot is the most common one. They don't tend to get many other type of diseases. Pests, well, people laugh when they think that, you know, carnivorous plants can get insect pests, but they're not immune, believe it or not. They might collect insects, but they're not immune to all the other pests such as mealybugs, spider mites, thrips, and green fly, white fly, all of them. You know, no different to any other type of plant. Most insects tend to be not a bother, as I say. They're not commonly attracted to Nepenthes or any other type of carnivorous plants. But the most common one you're more likely to see will be thrips. And thrips always seem to attack things like the flower heads and also the growing, developing pitchers. They seem to take a liking for it. And a lot of insects, especially the very, very, very tiny thrips, are very hard to see. You might just notice that your plant's not looking so good. And normally I'd recommend using things like neem oil and insecticides and that to get rid of it. But with carnivorous plants, I don't like to spray them personally with anything. If I rarely do, but if I do see any type of pest at all, it's usually very tiny thrips. And I would just wipe them off with a cloth. Or if they're in parts it's very difficult to reach, I just bring the plant and spray it really well with a jet spray, and that dislodges any. It seems to do the job, and that's something you do need to keep an eye on. But luckily, Nepenthes are pretty much hardy compared to a lot of plants when it comes to pests. So guys, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you grow these wonderful pitcher plants, you've learned a little bit more about them today and how to care for them. And I want to send you loads of love, heaps of happiness, and tons of plant power from across the Emerald Isle. And until my next video, bye!